In this video, I'll be looking at the changes that are being made to the way array functions like sequence and frequency work in the latest versions of Microsoft Excel. And I'll also be looking at the notion of a spilled range, which is the output that these functions produce. You can refer to these spilled ranges with a shorthand notation, which makes them much easier to work with. So let's look at how to use an array formula to create a spilled range. So the function I'm going to use is sequence, which, as you'll know from the name, creates a sequence of values. So let's type equals, and then let's start putting in the function name. Sequence, once it recognizes, of course, you can press the tab key to complete it and open the bracket. Now it wants how many rows, so I'll put in 10 values. A comma, then for the next bit of information, just in one column, then a comma. Then it asks for the start value, let's say 5, comma, and then let's say increase each value by 6. Right, now if I press enter, there we go, it's created those 10 values, that sequence of 10 values. Now notice that this range now has a thin blue border around it. That's how you recognize a spilled range. A spilled range is, as the name suggests, is where the formula spills or outputs a range of values into a range of cells. And the big advantage of spilled ranges is that you can refer to them in a shortcut manner. To see this, let's say I want to now multiply each value here by 3. So what I would have normally have done, and what you can still do, is I would put a formula here in the first cell alongside here. So I'd put equals 3 times, and then I'd put A1. I would then enter that and then copy it down to do all the rest. But because it's a spilled range, all I need to do is to put a hash sign after the first cell. So if I put a hash here, as you can see, it then refers to the entire spilled range, and all I have to do is to press enter, and they're all done. So as you can see, that's much quicker, and particularly if this was a very long column, say 200, 300 values, then putting it in the first one and copying down to the rest would be tedious and difficult. Here I simply needed to enter it just into the one cell, the initial cell. Notice that this too is a spilled range, so this can be referred to as well. So let's say that I wanted to add these two columns together. I could simply put equals this. Like that. Notice I'm using the hash sign to indicate the spilled range. Now, as you can probably guess here, once I press enter, it will do them all. Just like that. So, and again, it's a spilled range. So there's a bit, as you can see, spilled ranges do have this big advantage of being able to be referred to using this very quick shorthand. Now, notice too that if you look at the formula here, in the first column, the first cell, I should say, of the range, the formula appears in normal text, but in the other cells, it's grayed out. What that means is that you can't edit the formula in any of these grayed out cells. You need to edit it if you want to change it in the first one. But again, the big advantage is that if I edit one of the formula, because it's all connected together via these spilled ranges, everything else will recalculate. So let's say I now want to change this range, this sequence here, so that each one increases by 5 rather than 6. All I need to do is to go to the first cell here, go into the formula, and change that 6 to a 5. Press enter, and everything else has now recalculated perfectly. be careful not to edit one of the cells within the spilled range, because if you do that, it will cause an error, because you have to be careful that the range into which the values are going to be spilled is empty. If not, you'll get an error. To see this, let me put something different in, say this cell here. So I'll simply change this to some other number, and as you can see, we get the spill error because this range was no longer empty, so it couldn't spill into it, which means, of course, all the other ones don't work either. So let's just undo that, and we get back to what we had previously. Now, of course, you can also refer to the spilled range in other formulas. So let's say I want to sum these columns. I can simply put here equals sum. Then simply refer to this spilled range like that, as usual, and it's done. Then, of course, I can copy across and it will do all the others. And notice that it refers to the correct spilled range in each case. So as another example of using an array formula to create a spilled range, let me return to an example I showed before of using the frequency function to create a frequency distribution from raw data. Now, this is the data I used before. It's just these 25 values with a maximum value of 60 and a minimum of 6. So I decided to group these into 6 intervals of 10 wide. So let me just create the low and upper class boundaries here using the sequence function. So we got sequence, 1 column, 6 columns, 6 rows rather, 1 column, that's better, starting at 0 and increasing by 10. So that gives me those. Notice, of course, that's a spilled range. And for this one, I want 6 rows again, 1 column. This time starting at 10 and increasing by 10. And there's my upper class boundaries. Now notice these are both spilled ranges, so I'll be able to refer to them using that shorthand notation. Now previously, when I looked at this, I showed how to use the frequency function using the older method, where you had to highlight all the cells where you wanted the frequencies to go. That was very important. Then you put in the frequency function, and to enter it, you had to press Control Shift Enter. Now with these new array formulae, you don't need to do that. You can simply enter it into the first cell and it will spill into the rest. So let's show how to do this. It's the same function, frequency. There we go. Now it wants the data array. Now this is not a spilled range, so I will have to put it in the usual way. Comma, bins array, which is the upper class boundaries. Now previously, of course, I would have highlighted all of these. Now all I need to do, because it's a spilled range, is put B8 hash. As you can see, it's referred to everything. And now I don't even have to press Control Shift Enter anymore, just enter, and it does it fine. The difference, there's one slight difference here. Notice it's a spilled range, as expected. It also, as well as indicating how many values are in each interval, and remember this shows how many values there are greater than 10 and up to 20 and so on. It also puts a 0 at the end to indicate there are no values greater than 60. Now, because this is a spilled range, we can refer to it accordingly. These two are spilled ranges as well, so let me just show you how we'd find the mean of this group data using the formula. Of course, it's the sum of the fx values divided by the sum of the frequencies. Now, x here, of course, is the midpoint of the interval, and f is the frequency. So that's multiplying them together, fx. So here I can put in the formula here, But again, I don't need to put it in once and then copy it down. I can use the spilled ranges. So I'm simply going to put, now to find the midpoint, of course, you add together the lower and upper class boundaries and then divide that sum by 2. So I'm going to put in A8 hash plus B8 hash, divide by 2, and it should do them all because it's referring to the spilled range. And indeed it has. As you can see, these are the midpoints of those intervals. And similarly now to find f times x, I don't need to put in the formula for the first one, then copy down. I can use the fact that they're spilled ranges to do that. So it's simply frequency, which is that range, times the midpoint, which is this range. And there we are, and it does them all. Notice, of course, here it says NA, which means there's it doesn't exist. That's, of course, because there's no midpoint here alongside this 0. Now, you've just got to be careful here because of that, because if you, what we need to do, of course, is find the sum of these values and divide it by the sum of the frequencies. And if we use the spilled range here, it's going to give us an error because it will include this not available term here, and it won't work. For these, it's okay because although it will include the 0, that doesn't make any difference. So what I'm going to do is find the sum of the frequencies. I know it's 25, of course, in this case. And again, I can use the spilled range notation. There we go, 25. Now, I could, if I do that here, of course, it's not going to work, as you'll see. So unfortunately, that's not going to work because of that value there. So in fact, here you will have to go back to the old-fashioned method of just highlighting the relevant range here, just down to there. And then that works fine. And of course, the mean would be simply this value divided by that. So you just have to be slightly careful in that case, but in most cases of spilled ranges, this won't be an issue. So hopefully you can see here how using these new array formula, I think they're often called dynamic array formula, that generate spilled ranges, can make things much quicker to deal with the range of data that is so produced.